Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 22nd of April. Volodymyr Zelenskiy, the comedian, has just won the Ukraine elections in an absolute landslide. He beat out Poroshenko, and so this is Populist beating out Nationalist, and that is going to be the topic tonight. And a very warm welcome to all of you returning to my channel, and a very warm welcome too for those who are joining me for the first time. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and please, if you do, like, comment and subscribe below. And I'm hoping that you all had a pleasant Easter, and of course our heart goes out to the victims of the Sri Lankan bombings on Easter weekend. Absolutely terrible thing to have happened, and our thoughts and prayers with all of the families and relatives that were involved in that situation. 200. Wow, I mean, unbelievable. Anyway, under some brighter news, I hope, the Ukraine elections have just swung dramatically into the populist arena, and they have elected Volodymyr Zelenskiy. Now, this was a chap who actually played, he's a comedian, sorry, and he plays the role of a school teacher who gets elected as president after he makes a rant on Twitter, and it goes absolutely viral, and people fall in love with him, and he gets elected into the presidency. And of course, I'm sure it is a comedy of errors because it is a comedy show and he's a comedian. But I find it interesting that more and more we're finding these I don't want to call these common folk, but you know, not part of the club, people who are getting elected into power. Now, Poroshenko is the candy billionaire, as they call him. He picked up a factory very cheaply after the breakup of Russia, and turned himself into a chocolate billionaire. Well, he's part of the old school aristocracy in Russia, and people definitely did not want any more of that. They saw that as just a continuation of the lies and the corruption that they have seen over the last, well, 100 years or so. And in fact, many of the electorate said that they're just absolutely sick and tired of all of the corruption that they're seeing within government. Nothing is getting done, and the people who get elected line their own pockets, create situations that are good for them and not so good for everyone else, and everyone is having to eke out a living. I'm going to show you some articles in a moment which outline some of the dissatisfaction on the ground in the Ukraine. Now, of course, as a leader, he is going to have to be incredibly adept right off the get-go, because there are all kinds of ongoing problems in the Ukraine, not the least of which, as I say, is poverty on the ground. There are employment issues. There is still fighting going on in western Ukraine, down in the Crimea area, where they had, well, they called it a kangaroo referendum. But I can assure you that many people who have separated from Russia want to go back to Russia. I've just been watching some videos around Belarus and Moldova and this kind of stuff, and when you talk to the older people, anyone above sort of 50 to 60 who remembers the Russian presence, even though it was communist, their lives were much more stable, much more predictable, things were reasonably well maintained, and there was some kind of order on the streets. And now, of course, depending on which country you live in, there is a variety of conditions, and certainly none of these countries have thrived since they separated from Russia. So you can see why the Crimea might want to return to Russia, but of course Sevastopol is the home of Russia's Black Sea port, and the thought of the Americans who were aiding Ukraine a couple of years ago getting a foothold next to their deep water port in the Black Sea caused the Russians to be very nervous, and it kind of forced them into this position to protect their interests in the Crimea, to take over the situation. So there is still fighting going on the western border. Russia is supplying, of course, all of the military needs to the troops there, and along with that comes all of the problems with Gazprom. Now, Ukraine is a major conduit for all of the natural gas pumped from Russia through to Europe. Ukraine owes Russia a huge, and I mean in the billions of dollars, in unpaid bills for gas, and basically the tit for tat has been, if you shut off the gas to the Ukraine over unpaid bills, then the Ukraine will shut off the gas to Europe. Well, now Russia is building 2 other pipelines, one to the north, one to the south. One goes under the Baltic and the other goes through Turkey and up into Europe that way. And so there is all kinds of contentious issues going on between Ukraine and Russia at the present time. So basically he has a very, very uphill battle right from the get-go. Anyway, let's flip over to these articles and I'll come back and do a quick wrap-up. Okie dokie, here we go. BBC News, Ukraine election, comedian Zelensky wins presidency by landslide. With nearly all the ballots counted in the runoff vote, Mr. Zelensky has taken more than 73%, with incumbent Petro Poroshenko trailing far behind on 24%. I will never let you down, Mr. Zelensky told celebrating supporters. Russia says it wants him to show sound judgment, honesty and pragmatism so that relations can improve. Russia backs separatists in eastern Ukraine. The comments came from Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev in a Facebook post on Monday in Russian. He said he expected Mr. Zelensky to repeat familiar ideological formulas that he used in the election campaign, adding, "I have no illusions on that score. At the same time, there is a chance to improve relations with our country." Mr. Poroshenko, who admitted defeat after the first exit polls were published, has said he will not be leaving politics. He told voters that Mr. Zelensky, 41, was too inexperienced to stand up to Russia effectively. Mr. Zelensky, a political novice, is best known for starring in a satirical television series, Servant of the People, in which his character accidentally becomes Ukrainian president. Just a quick look at the map of Ukraine. Here is Moldova, and of course here is the capital Kiev, and you can see this is the Crimea. Here is the port of Sevastopol, where the Russian big seaport is, the naval sea base, and of course the border ends here at Mariupol, and this is part of Russia. And of course here is Sochi, the big resort of all the Russian politicians, but you can see this little channel here, the Isthmus of Istanbul, is the only way for the Russian Navy to get out into the Mediterranean, around Greece. So you can see why this is such a strategic place and means a lot to the Russians, and this fighting will continue for the Crimea as long as the naval base is right here. This from Gallup. Old problems await new leader in Ukraine. Nearly 2/3 of Ukrainians, 65%, are dissatisfied with their standard of living. Nearly half say their standard of living is getting worse. A record 31% say they want to move to another country permanently. Regardless of the outcome in Ukraine's presidential election this weekend, Ukraine's next leader will continue to face high expectations from residents who are waiting for them to complete the reforms they were promised after the Euromaidan revolution. Among these are continuing economic reforms that enabled the country to crawl out of a deep recession in 2015 and ensuring that its economic growth reaches more Ukrainian households. Fewer than 3 in 10 residents, 29% last year, said they are satisfied with their current standard of living, and half said it is getting worse. While these marks are an improvement since the height of the country's near economic collapse, these numbers still lag behind the regional averages of the former Soviet Union states. 2/3 of Ukrainians dissatisfied with standard of living. Ukrainians still struggling with basics. A variety of factors are behind this enduring level of dissatisfaction, including the persistent problems that many Ukrainians have with meeting their families' basic needs. Nearly 4 in 10 adults in Ukraine report not having enough money for food, 38%, or shelter, 38%, while almost half, 47%, say they are dissatisfied with the availability of good, affordable housing in their city. Are we seeing a connection here between the Yellow Vest protests and the sudden election of populist leaders, or the re-election of populist leaders? Because I sure am. Everywhere you look, every article you read, the people on the ground having a tough time making ends meet. And this from the Moscow Times: Russia agrees to ensure gas supplies to Hungary, bypassing Ukraine. Transit agreement between Russia and Ukraine expires at the end of this year, and a new agreement has not yet been negotiated. Today, the CEO of Gazprom and I have concluded an agreement that Gazprom will ensure gas supplies to Hungary regardless of whether the transit agreement is concluded between Russia and Ukraine. State-run Gazprom is building two pipelines, Nord Stream 2 and the European leg of the Turk Stream, in the face of opposition from the European Union and the United States. Both will carry Russian gas to Europe bypassing Ukraine. The Nord Stream 2 link under the Baltic Sea is jointly funded by Gazprom and 5 regional energy companies. The planned Turk Stream leg from Turkey to the EU is set to receive financing from a 50-50 joint venture between Gazprom and its Turkish partner. So really what this indicates to me is the length and breadth and depth of public dissatisfaction across the world. Everywhere you look, the public are deeply dissatisfied in huge numbers. Like I say, we're up into the 80% in some countries, and not much lower than 60% in other countries, of the population feeling that they have been betrayed by their governments. And you're going to see this continued trend of electing these somewhat outsiders who at least offer some kind of connection. A populist leader. And of course, you know, the globalist leaders are absolutely scared of populism, so they basically paint it as this horrible, you know, almost monstrous kind of ideology, because it does the one thing that the globalists really have a lot of difficulty doing, and that is relating to the general public. Most of the globalists lead the kind of lives that you and I could never ever lead. And so, you know, the idea of sitting down and having a beer with Macron and having like a one-to-one conversation is just completely unthinkable. There's nothing I have in common with Macron. Not a thing. So, whereas when you look at these popular, I think Matteo Salvini, Nigel Farage, now this guy, Volodymyr Zelenskiy, you know, you could sit down and have a beer and a laugh and a joke, and they can relate to your situation and what your concerns are. And I think that's what the public are looking for. They're just looking for politicians who can actually relate to their problem and take that sentiment into the government with them, and hopefully get some common sense out of the whole situation. Now, I'm not necessarily holding out too much hope of that, because, you know, when anyone looks into the workings of government, you immediately see how convoluted the whole process is, and it's the process that is bogging everything down. It is very, very difficult to make decisions quickly. And of course I understand that, you know, when you're talking about legislation, and I could get into a whole bunch of legislation which has happened recently, which is poor legislation, and it is riddled with loopholes. But there are certain basic things. One, which I feel very, very strongly about, is that we should have a national infrastructure program, so that no matter who is in power, no matter what party is in power, infrastructure is renewed and replaced in a timely fashion, and that program is going to be implemented and maintained by whomever is in power. Isn't that just a no-brainer? It makes sense to me, and I think it makes sense to everybody who has rattled their bones and their teeth driving through potholes. So you're going to see a continued trend, as I said before, as long as these globalist leaders do not get the problems and the plight of the everyday people that make up their countries, they are going to continue to be alienated and disenfranchised. They will be disenfranchised after they have disenfranchised the members of the general public. Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed this video and the information, and please, if you have, like, comment and subscribe below. Click that big red button, it really helps when you do. And in the meantime, this is Hound Dog Steve wishing you a wonderful week coming up. You take care, and we will talk very, very shortly. See you now. Bye.